Hello, as always, I'm Cosmic, and welcome to another episode of Mailhub, your weekly community interaction show. The date is, of course, the 8th of November 2015, and the game in the background is Total War Arena. I've been playing this non-stop recently, putting over 100 hours of the closed beta so far. I'm currently trying to get my Leonidas commander up to tier 10, all the while leveling up Arminius, which is one of the barbarian faction characters. They've just done a massive barbarian update, so now the barbarians can be taken up to tier 8, I believe. And they're a lot of fun to play, the barbarians, I have to say. They're very light, they're very fast, they're all light infantry. They pack a lot of damage in forests, in forested areas, so they have been a tremendous amount of fun to play. Now, the first question comes in from Anonymous that says, Mr. Engine, Fallout 4 review, ? Yes, there will be a Fallout 4 review. However, it will not be on day one. I did not manage to get a review code, so I will be buying the game like everybody else on day one, and so you should expect it probably on Thursday or Friday. The reason for that is I'm not going to shortcut it. I could do what other people do, not mentioning any names, which is basically buy the game, play a couple of hours, and then write a review. That is not a review, that's a first impressions at best. And I don't want to shortcut myself and shortchange you guys. You expect quality from this channel, and I expect quality from this channel. So I really want to get my teeth into the game, put as many hours in as possible, if not complete it, before I put my review out there. And hopefully you guys will understand that and appreciate that. And then once the review comes along at the end of the week, you will watch it and give it a like if you like it, etc., etc. So yeah, as I say, do expect a Fallout 4 review, because obviously I love Fallout, and we'll see how the fourth installment matches up to the previous ones. So like I say, probably Thursday at the earliest, Friday or Saturday at the latest. I'm going to try and make the cutoff point Friday, but it just depends on how much game time I get to put in during the week. The second question comes in from MK that says, Cosmic, with the recent lull moment of Fallout 4's embargo of an embargo, what are your thoughts on embargoes overall? Are they good or bad for the industry? Embargoes, like many other things, like many legal things, can be used for both good and evil, especially when it comes to publishers. I am of the personal belief that embargoes are good for the industry if used properly. I myself rely on embargoes to stay competitive with bigger channels and, bigger outlets. At the end of the day, if, for example, all the big YouTubers and all the big games media outlets got to post reviews first and I had to wait for something else, I had to relate till after release or something like that, that would be an unfair climate, and then that would create it would be very difficult to stay competitive in that marketplace. Embargoes like that for me are really, really helpful and really, really useful so that I can stay competitive, and it gives an even playing field on trying to drive traffic in that sense. However, when publishers use embargoes, they can also use them to their advantage, which means that's the customer's disadvantage, which means when they do things like Ubisoft have done in the past with Assassin's Creed, where they embargo all reviews and critique till after launch, that kind of thing is really awful practice. It's terrible, it's disgusting, and you should not put up with it. It's one of those things that once we as media have signed embargoes, it's hard to kind of wriggle out of them. Myself, I tend not to review games that have those kind of embargoes. If a games company, a PR company, or a games developer or a publisher comes to me and say, will you review our game, however the embargo is after the release date, I probably won't review that game. And the reason is because then I am tied in not telling people probably how bad it is, because it tends to be the case that publishers who do that to embargoes and kind of censor people from critiquing the game till after launch, it's trying to basically make people buy the game before they actually hear what it's like, and that's usually a telling sign that the game is going to be bad or broken or something along those lines. And it's not just embargoes that can be used, for bad purposes. I mean, ultimately, review codes themselves, the embargo could be fair and, it could be a couple of days before the game is even launched, but the review code itself could be tainted. You've heard of Warner Brothers and that kind of thing, making sure that their review codes are adhered to. You can't say anything negative about the game here, or etc., etc. And that in itself is even more insidious than a bad embargo. But it comes down to, ultimately, if it's used correctly, then it's fine. And if it's not, then it is a problem. And sadly, it is a case at the moment in the industry where publishers aren't really, let's say, punished for doing crappy things to the consumer. And this is one of the reasons why I was so pleased that Steam refunds came into place, because it gave boycotting a video game a new meaning. Because in the past, people were like, well, we need to boycott this video game, but nothing ever happened, because either people didn't stick with it, or there was a vocal minority who wanted to boycott it, but everybody else kind of suffered in silence. Now is the case. You have the tools and you have the power to speak with your money in a more literal and easier sense than ever before. I mean, you look at what happened to the new Arkham game. The game was utter shit on launch on the PC, and people refunded that like there was no tomorrow, to the point that Warner Brothers had to take it off the store. And that is probably one of the biggest things I've seen in recent years of, money actually talking. And it's a case of, this kind of thing, the power is slowly going into the consumer's hands, as it should have been in the first place. And I think that, publishers who abuse embargoes and abuse review codes will ultimately get theirs in the end. And I think that on top of all of this, it comes down to, do you trust the person who is reviewing the game? And this is a big, big important thing. Whether it's me or another person in games media, do you trust this person? Do they have integrity? Do they say what they're going to do? That doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with their opinions on something. Just because you think a certain mechanic is rubbish and they think it's good, doesn't necessarily mean that they've been tainted or they're biased or anything like that. It's just a matter of opinion. But it comes down to, do you trust them? Do they have integrity? Do they have a track record of doing as they say? Have they got a track record of being honest? It's that kind of thing. You need to build trust with the person that you listen to when it comes to reviews. And I think that this channel in particular, that's something I strive towards all the time. That is something that I consistently take into consideration when getting review codes. That's why I fully disclose where my games come from in the description. I always say, if I got the code from a developer or a publisher or anything like that. And like I've always stated, I will not take tainted review codes, won't do it. If someone asks me to review a game, then that's fine. If they ask me to review their game and not say anything bad about it, well, that's just not going to happen. So I just won't even review it at that point. And that comes down to even bigger games. I have passed on bigger games and AAA titles I have said no to, simply because the PR company has asked me not to talk about something, and I just won't do it. And I can't name those, but I can say that you would be surprised at what they are. And I think that it's just one of those things that I chose the integrity of the channel over short-term game in that kind of way. And I think that that's what's important, is trust between the person who's talking and the audience. And that's something that I take very seriously, and I think that a lot of games media professionals do take very seriously. There are some that don't, and I think that those people are starting to be caught out on things, and hopefully, that's their problem. Ultimately, it's their fault. They created that situation. So, I mean, going back to the original question in terms of embargoes, it's one of those things that I think embargoes are good for the purpose of having a level playing field, making sure that information gets out there. But it's one of those things that currently can be abused by publishers and developers, and hopefully that as Steam refunds and more tools come into the consumer's hands to kind of fight back at the crap that publishers do to us, then this kind of thing will happen less and less. And ultimately, it does the badder side of embargoes, the bad situations that usually tend to happen with AAA developers. Let's put it that way. There are a couple of indie developers who have done pretty shitty things in the past, but 9 times out of 10, it is usually the bigger industry dogs who will abuse the system in that regard. You tend to find that indie developers kind of have usually a fair embargo, usually even up to a week before the actual game launches. Because they really want the publicity, they really want the attention on them, and ultimately they tend to be proud of their products, and they tend to have put a lot of time and effort into their products. Not that AAA developers don't, but AAA publishers, they don't really care that much, and they don't mind putting out a substandard product and making everyone pay for it. So it's a case of, my personal opinion is embargoes are good in general when used properly. However, they can be bad in some cases. In Fallout 4's case, it's kind of hilarious. It wasn't an unfair embargo, but an embargo of an embargo is pretty hilarious, and it's kind of cute at the same time. So there you go. So that's all for this week. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Do send in your questions and your topics for discussion to mailhub@cosmicengine.net, and I will see you next time.